Welcome back to Figuring It Out. I'm Rachel Lee. If you're new here, this is a space where we talk honestly about life, healing, relationships, grief, emotional patterns, survival mode, and all the other complicated human stuff that us people are usually trying to simplify. So, if something in this episode resonates with you, follow the podcast, leave a review, or send it to somebody who might need to hear it as well. All right. So, today we're talking about something that I think gets wildly oversimplified. And I'm probably going to piss off some people with this one, but that's okay. Because I am exhausted by the internet relationship slogans being placed on actual human interaction. And specifically the following phrase: if they wanted to, they would. No, Susan, sometimes if they know how, they would. Truthfully, I've used that language too. I've said or thought if he wanted to, he would. He's just emotionally unavailable, or he just doesn't care. So, this episode isn't me judging people for simplifying relationships. It's actually me realizing over time that humans are often even more emotionally complicated than even the labels we put on them. Now, before everybody loses their ever-loving mind, let me be clear. I'm not saying tolerate endless disrespect. I'm not saying stay in harmful situations forever. I'm not saying awareness means abandoning boundaries. What I am saying is human beings are way more emotionally complicated than social media likes to admit. And I think people throw around phrases like, he's emotionally unavailable, or she just doesn't care, without actually understanding what emotional unavailability even means. Because sometimes people aren't emotionally unavailable. As I've come to learn and understand more, it's actually that maybe they're emotionally overwhelmed, emotionally suppressed, emotionally compartmentalized, emotionally underdeveloped, emotionally terrified, or emotionally carrying years of unresolved shit they never learned how to process. And all of those are very different conversations. So today I want to talk about the difference between emotional unavailability, emotional awareness, and emotional capacity. And those are actually not interchangeable. And understanding the difference has changed how I view people, relationships, and even myself. So, let's get into it. I think one of the biggest lies social media tells people is this idea that wanting something automatically means you have the emotional ability to execute it properly. And real life just doesn't work like that. Because if that were true, everybody who wanted to quit smoking would quit immediately. Everybody who wanted to lose weight would. Everybody who wanted to heal would just heal. And everybody who wanted healthy relationships would magically have them. But humans are more complicated than that. I smoked for most of my life. And trust me, there were many times I wanted to quit. I tried to quit. But wanting to and having the emotional, mental, physical, and nervous system capacity to actually sustain the change consistently are two different things. Same thing with weight loss. People love to simplify it into, well, if you wanted it badly enough, you'd do it. Meanwhile, some people are dealing with medical issues, emotional eating, trauma, stress, hormones, addiction patterns, self-worth issues, or years of using food as comfort or control. But sure, let's flatten all of human behavior into motivational slogans, shall we? I think people do this because it feels safer to believe well, if they cared, they'd just do it, because then relationships and people become easier to categorize. But as I've learned, humans aren't spreadsheets. People can genuinely want something and still not fully know how to create it yet. And yes, that includes relationships. That's kind of where this conversation started for me, because I started realizing I was looking at relationships through that same lens. Now, yes, I've said before that I've been involved with emotionally unavailable men. And honestly, some probably were. But when I really started looking deeper, I realized not everybody I had labeled emotionally unavailable was actually emotionally incapable of feeling. Some of them felt deeply. They just didn't know what to do with those feelings. I understand that more now because I've lived versions of it myself. And not necessarily in romantic relationships either, just life in general. Feeling emotions and knowing how to process emotions are not the same thing. Nobody really taught me emotional processing growing up. Nobody sat me down and said, hey, this is how you regulate conflict. This is how you communicate needs. This is how you feel hurt without shutting down. This is how you stay emotionally present. I didn't even realize until later in life how many emotional skills I never actually learned. Like how to have healthy conflict in relationships. I can communicate. I can have conversations. But still, sometimes emotionally, conflict feels uncomfortable to me in ways I really didn't understand for a long time. And having that awareness changed how I looked at myself too, because it made me realize sometimes people aren't intentionally emotionally unavailable. Sometimes nobody ever taught them how to safely stay emotionally present during hard conversations. Most people are just emotionally improvising adulthood. And sometimes I sit here and think, how were people supposed to learn those things? Like how to calm ourselves down, how to communicate, how to have hard conversations, how to handle conflict. And now as a parent myself, I'm trying to teach my kids things I had to learn much later in life. Breath work, staying intentional, regulating before reacting, communicating honestly. One of the things that surprised me most when I started actually learning about all of these types of things was how connected our bodies and emotions actually are. And listen, if you've never looked into breath work before, genuinely do that. Trauma has a way of teaching people to compartmentalize, to put emotions in boxes, suppress them, avoid them, distract from them, to overfunction through them. Understanding this has helped me realize that not everybody knows how to express their emotions. And not because they don't care, but because somewhere along the line, emotions stop feeling safe. And I think that's a very different conversation than somebody simply not caring about you. Now, to be clear, that doesn't mean you stay in a relationship that hurts you endlessly. But I do think there's a difference between understanding someone and reducing them to a slogan. I also think emotional awareness and emotional capacity get confused constantly. And this is why people get tripped up. Because emotional awareness means you can recognize your patterns, your emotions, your wounds, your triggers, your behaviors. But emotional capacity, that's different. Capacity is what someone can actually hold emotionally. Conflict, intimacy, vulnerability, communication, stress, disappointment, accountability, connection. And honestly, trauma impacts capacity a lot. Some people can intellectually understand themselves completely, and still emotionally shut down under pressure. That doesn't automatically make them manipulative villains either. Sometimes it makes them overwhelmed humans. I think we've entered into this era where everybody is trying to simplify healing into black and white internet rules. Leave immediately. Cut everybody off. Protect your peace. If they wanted to, they would. Never tolerate this. Never accept that. And honestly, real life is usually much more complicated than that. But discernment is personal. And when I say discernment, I basically mean learning how to look at your life honestly and make decisions based on what's actually true for you instead of what somebody on the internet told you to do. Because what works for one person may not work for another. And what feels acceptable, workable, healing, or manageable in one relationship may feel completely unhealthy to someone else. And that's okay. Humans aren't cookie cutter. Relationships aren't cookie cutter either. One thing I've learned over the last several years is that a lot of people perform healing online. I think social media is part of why this can get so confusing too. Everybody has a list now of what they'd never tolerate, what they'd immediately leave, what healed people do, what emotionally healthy people would never accept. But real life, again, is often messier than the identities people perform publicly. And I'm very careful on this podcast not to pretend I'm fully healed or above any of this, because I'm not. The relationships I have now are completely different than the relationships I had 10 years ago because I'm different now. I move differently. I communicate differently. I understand myself differently. I recognize patterns faster. I have way more awareness, more honesty, more accountability. But that doesn't mean I suddenly became some perfectly healed human being with flawless relationships. Truthfully, I don't even think that exists. I think growth is less about becoming perfect and more about becoming honest. Honest about what works for you, what doesn't, what you're capable of, what you're still learning, what you need, what you tolerate, what you no longer tolerate, and where you still need growth yourself. Because awareness without honesty just becomes some sort of performance. And a lot of people are now exhausted from trying to perform healing instead of actually living it. Before we wrap up, if there's one thing I want people to take from this episode, it's this. Humans are more complicated than internet slogans. I think sometimes we've become so focused on labeling people that we've stopped trying to understand them. And again, understanding someone doesn't mean abandoning yourself. But it also doesn't mean reducing every human struggle to, if they wanted to, they would. Because honestly, sometimes people genuinely do not know how yet. And if I'm being really honest, there are probably areas of your life and mine where we've both wanted something deeply and still struggled to fully execute it consistently. That doesn't always mean lack of desire. Sometimes it means lack of tools, lack of awareness, lack of healing, lack of safety, or lack of capacity. I think giving ourselves and other people a little more humanity around that really matters. Not blindly, not without boundaries, but with nuance, because awareness and grace can exist at the same time. Well, that's all I got for you today. I'm Rachel Lee, and I'll see you next time as we keep figuring it out.